Cue video.
Debbie Bertland sitting in for Mayor Bassett, who is out this week. Will the city clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Dan Grouse.
Here.
Councilmember Jeff Sanderson.
Here.
Councilmember Wendy Weicker. Councilmember David Wiesentiner.
Here.
Councilmember Benson Wong. Deputy Mayor Debbie Bertland.
Here.
Mayor Bruce Bassett.
Okay, question for the city clerk. Do we need to approve the agenda first before going into executive session?
Yes, please.
Good.
Entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Nay. Okay, the first order of business then is executive session. Number 1, to discuss with legal counsel pending or potential litigation pursuant to RCW 42.30.1101I, I believe, for 30 minutes. Okay.
Cue video.
So council's just concluded the first executive session. No action will be taken. And we're moving on to executive session number 2 to discuss with legal counsel pending or potential litigation pursuant to RCW 4230-1101I for 1 hour.
Cue video.
Council is extending its second executive session for approximately 15 minutes.
Cue video. Cue video.
All right, council has concluded its second executive session, and I thank the audience for your patience. I realize it's a nice night on the 1st of August, and sitting in this chamber probably wasn't your first choice. Council has already set the agenda, taken care of roll call, concluded executive session 1 and executive session 2. So what we will do at this point is 2 points of special business tonight. And these are the moments, as Bruce would often say, are the better ones of council. The first one that I'd like to call out is our first item of special business being a Women's Equality Proclamation Day. So this year we will be holding our second annual recognition of Women's Equality Day, and it will be August 25th. I'm looking at Diane, who's got the details. She's nodding. Great. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and read the proclamation itself. Whereas on August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution extended the right to vote to women, a major victory for women's rights and gender equality. And whereas on the anniversary of the 19th Amendment, Women's Equality Day, we celebrate the progress that has been made toward securing women's full participation in our democracy and renew our commitment to securing equal rights, freedoms, and opportunities for all women. And whereas on Women's Equality Day, we honor the character and perseverance of America's women and all those who work to make the same rights and opportunities possible for our daughters and sons. And whereas women's contributions are growing our economy and advancing our country, but despite these gains, the dreams of too many mothers and daughters continue to be deferred and denied. There's still more work to do, more doors of opportunity to open. And whereas in the 21st century, women should be able to be role models for young girls, showing her that with hard work, there are no limits to what can be accomplished, and fathers, sons, and brothers too should share these ambitions. On Women's Equality Day, we continue to support the work of building a society where women thrive, and whereas we share a powerful history of women and men, girls and boys working together to lift up women and girls in our community, and a continued commitment to gender equity for all women and girls. And whereas for the first time in history, a major political party has selected a woman candidate for the office of President of the United States. Now, therefore, I, Deputy Mayor Debbie Bertlin, do hereby proclaim August 25th, 2016 as Mercer Island Women's Equality Day and invite all Mercer Island residents to join together at Mercerdale Park on August 25th, 2016 at 6 p.m. to celebrate Women's Equality Day with live music, fun, food, and local guest speakers. Approved this first day of August, 2016. Diane, did you want to say anything? No? Okay. Well, it was fun last year, and I'm sure it will be fun this year, so we'll look forward to seeing lots of you out there. The second, I think we're going to call it, not a proclamation, Wendy had a great description for it, commentary. For National Night Out. We were trying to figure out if we had to, this is being city business, we had to figure out if it needed an official title or not. We wanted to move forward in the agenda, a reminder to the community that tomorrow is National Night Out. And while it is not, the special business is not on the agenda, we wanted to make sure that we feel that tomorrow's National Night Out is of particular significance. Because National Night Out is an annual community building event that promotes partnerships between police and the communities that they serve. It's a time to build relationships and work together to make our community a better place to live, work, and play. We're very fortunate on Mercer Island to have such a close community where citizens and the police officers can get to know each other on a first-name basis. And yet, as we look at the national headlines, we all recognize that this is a difficult time for our country as we see the results of the disconnect between those who protect our communities and those who live in our communities. The Mercer Island City Council recently formed a Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and as members of this committee, I, your Deputy Mayor, along with Council members Wong and Weicker, and Chief Holmes strongly encourage all of you to join in the conversation tomorrow night, August 2nd, during National Night Out. The city will host an outdoor event at the Sculpture Garden from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. that will include hot dogs and live music by our Citizen of the Year, Nancy Stewart. Police officers will also be visiting various neighborhoods in an effort to engage conversations as we all get to know each other better. So in recognition of all that we have in this community that is good and all that we know we can make even better, I encourage you to come either to the town center or to your respective communities' National Nights Out. So, people good? Any comment? Benson?
I just wanted to say that I think everybody knows how blessed we are to live in this community and how fortunate we are to be able to work together with our police officers and also our firefighters. That we can't take these things for granted. I really encourage people to be proactive in building the bridges and maintaining those bridges, in getting to know your police officers and your firefighters, because when the crisis comes, if and when it does come, we need to know each other, and we need to be able to support each other. So I think I certainly encourage people to participate in this National Night Out, and I'm happy to say that hopefully the weather will be good for tomorrow. My neighborhood is actually meeting tonight, so that's they're fortunate to do that. I also wanted to say one thing, if I could, regarding this Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I hope it sends a positive message to the island. As our community, our local community, our state and nation becomes more diverse in terms of race, creed, nationality, and religion, and other different ways. It's not enough to be tolerant of diversity. I think we just really need to learn how to embrace the diversity that we have and to value the differences that we all have as people. So I just wanted to say that. I'm proud that we have a committee on this island. So.
Thanks. Okay. So with that, the next item of business is appearances. This is the opportunity for anyone to speak to the council on any item. So please come forward, give us your name and address for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Please note that the expanded rules regarding public comment are hanging on the chambers of the door if you need further explanation. Now with that, our first speaker tonight is Bart Dawson, who will be speaking on behalf of the Mercer Island Library Board. So, Bart.
Thank you. I'm Bart Dawson, 8812 Southeast 77th Place, Mercer Island. I'm here tonight as Vice Chair of your Mercer Island Library Board to bring you the report that the Mercer Island Library reopened on July 23, 2016, following some remodeling by the King County Library System. The library looks pleasantly much as it did before remodeling. It now has the long-awaited automated book return, a new small study room, a reorganized staff area, a large window that brightens the large meeting room, and 6 new study tables under the glorious skylight. While most of the upgrading is complete, some more improvements will appear soon. The capability to wirelessly print from personal laptop computers, and a permanently installed computer image projector in the large meeting room. Some on the library board want KCLS to improve lighting of the whiteboard in the adjoining wall in the meeting room. We are thankful that the library was closed for only 10 weeks, a much shorter time than the 30-plus weeks KCLS sought, when they wanted to partially demolish and totally rebuild the interior. The library board thanks the Trinity Lutheran Church for providing the space for the temporary library. Many people have complimented both the church and KCLS for the nice temporary library. On behalf of all Mercer Island citizens, the board thanks the City Council for caring and acting. You deliberated and acted 8 times in 2014 in support of our library. You listened attentively to Islanders during the uproar over the January 2014 KCLS remodeling plan. You then asked to hear directly from KCLS. And then you wrote a letter to the KCLS Board of Trustees asking them to delay the remodeling in order to provide further opportunity for public input. After considering your letter, statements from many Mercer Island citizens, and 3 Mercer Island council members, the KCLS Board of Trustees reluctantly approved a 90-day delay to allow for additional consideration of additional Mercer Island inputs. You appointed a committee of citizens, the future library board, to meet with KCLS staff. 2 meetings were held with KCLS before they declared that they would not meet with Mercer Island again. You then unanimously reinstated the library board in order to legally require KCLS to continue consulting with Mercer Island. 3 more meetings were held. In late October, Brian Cairns, on behalf of the library board, sent you a memo stating that the progress to date does not fully address the goals of a thoughtful, active, and broadly based voice of the community. You then scheduled an extraordinary 5 o'clock study session to review the memo and the situation. That night, the whole council signed a letter addressed to KCLS board asking that the remodeling not proceed at this time. Later, the KCOS board narrowly agreed to halt the project for a second time. The vote was 3-2. The delay meant that the incoming executive director would resolve the dispute. The arrival in January 2015 of Gary Wasden, the new executive director, brought a return of mutual respect between Mercer Island citizens and KCOS. The end of this story is that the Mercer Island Library is preserved and that the promises surrounding the 2004 bond measure have been honored. Other people deserve our thanks for the final result. Of course, we thank Gary Wasden. We cannot overemphasize our gratitude for his understanding and his leadership that guided the KCOS staff to keeping the library we have today. We thank the 2010 library users who participated in Gary's survey concerning changes to the library. Incidentally, the survey results paralleled that of the Louder citizens and the library board, what we were saying the whole time. And last but not least, we thank the 3 council members who officially stood up for Mercer Island several times before the KCS Board of Trustees, Debbie Bertlin, Dan Grouse, and Benson Wong. They also participated in other ways and attended other meetings as well. They were always strong advocates for Mercer Island on behalf of the library we see today. Personally, I believe we would not have today's library without the leadership of Dan Grouse. In conclusion, finally, Mercer Island has a wonderful library building, a great staff, a good collection, good programs, a good assortment of used books to purchase. The library board invites everyone to visit the library and leave with something that will be a joy to read. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart. I know many of us, probably watching and up here, were reminded by the timeline of everything that so many people, so much time and energy that so many people put into that whole process. And I thank you. I personally thank the library board, friends of the library, trustee Rob Spitzer, fellow island resident, who I'm quite sure did a significant amount of work behind the scenes. Of course, fellow council member Grouse and Wong. But again, it was truly a community effort and perseverance and hard work. So thank you. And I hope everybody who hasn't been to the library goes. It is Mercer Island Library better.
Thank you.
I would also point out that Bart gave a whole new meaning to the word Plan B, which he aptly coined for purposes of the library, and without which I think that we would not have had an intelligent basis upon which to challenge what was going on at KCLS. I mean, Bart, for those of you probably who are new to the council may not be aware of it, but I mean, he put it just an amazing amount of time to develop alternatives, and they were very thoughtful alternatives on ways that the library could be done which would not be anywhere near as impactful as KCLS was proposing. And because of that, we could have an intelligent discussion with them. We had something to talk to them about. And I personally, first I appreciate your kind words, but more importantly, I thank you for, I don't know how many hours you put into actually giving us something that we could use to be effective negotiators with KCLS. So thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff?
No, again, I was at the session. It was a tremendous opening, and congratulations to the library board. We'll be bringing back later to the council the permanentization of the library board, which was put in place for this process, in which we're looking to have continue on indefinitely to continue the work.
Thanks. With that, we'll continue with public appearances. Sue?
Sue Stewart, 3205 84th Avenue Southeast. Good evening, Deputy Mayor Bertlin and City Council members. Congratulations on the Mercer Island Women's Equality Day. As president of Friends of Luther Burbank Park, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization here on the island since 1988, we support the Agenda Bill 5207, allowing docketing of amendments on a yearly basis. The action we're wanting is to preserve West Hill, Kite Hill as parkland. Amanda Clark, former president, former Mayor Elliott Newman, and I have met and talked with each of you council members over time and consider this a housekeeping action to show Kite Hill, West Hill as parkland on the land use map with the comprehensive plan, changing it from what is now shown as public facility land. This small but significant edit will allow Luther Burbank Park's master plan to mesh seamlessly with the land use plan. I spoke with Scott Greenberg today to discuss whether a development services amendment needs to be filed by Friends. We are not developers. We are talking about a public parkland with preservation in mind. The fees Scott mentioned involve thousands of dollars. Since our one feedback has been pretty much unanimous, so unless people have changed their minds on the sitting council, we were wondering if the council would wish to direct staff to make this change. If the Friends group files an amendment, we ask for you to consider perhaps a nonprofit fee and perhaps a SEPA review deemed unnecessary. Taking off my Parks hat now, thank you for initiating affordable housing to be 10% of any new housing developed in the town center. I thought that was excellent work. Tonight's Agenda Bill 5205 on residential development comes too late for my immediate neighborhood. The Koval Arboretum is pretty much being obliterated, and although we don't have 18 homes, thanks to the unanimous council no vote, the 16 homes are huge. They're out of context with the neighborhood, and legacy trees will be gone. The amount of impermeable surface ultimately dumps runoff directly into the south wetlands of Luther Burbank Park. What's necessary? Much more stringent watercourse definitions with setbacks from watercourses honored. Footprints protecting significant trees. And we ask that all tree easements require third-party oversight.
So I'm going to ask you to finish it?
Yes, retroactively. I just have a little sense. We agree with Dan Grouse that oversight by a homeowners association is no protection at all. The Koval property does have 2 tree easements. So thank you for your continued thoughtful work for the city.
Next.
I'm Alan Reed from Emmanuel Episcopal Church, 4486 Avenue Southeast, I had to think of it. Later on your agenda tonight, you have the opportunity to look at and charter some work for the Planning Commission around residential development standards. And we've had some conversations back and forth. I've appeared before the Planning Commission. I come tonight really to thank you for taking a look at that and including in that work some review around the needs for religious institutions. You know, there are more than a dozen different churches, synagogues on this island, and they're currently permitted as non-conforming uses in either residential or commercial properties. And out of that means every time you go to do something, it becomes a special case scenario. We think that there's an opportunity here to take a look at this in a more global way and come up with some rules for how we could do that. You know, as this island continues to grow, it just continues to grow, we feel the two-edged sword of this development in places like Emmanuel, which has got a nice bucolic park-like property, and it's got lovely gardens, the rest of that, and yet Our rector had a really hard time finding affordable housing, so we thought it would be an easy thing to build him a house on the property. I can't tell you. We're not there yet. And what it will take to do that continues to be a challenge we're willing to face. At the same time, we'd like to sort of figure out how this works for everybody else in the future. As we talk to other churches in the community, they also say, oh yeah, if we're going to do anything on property, we know it's going to be a long haul, and we don't know what the rules really are before we start, but we get into it and then see how the rules go. Just asking you to take a look at those rules, particularly as it befits a residence coming onto a religious property. I don't think that there's anything terribly controversial, but I do thank you for your support in this, and we look forward to how churches can continue to add to the nature of our community and make this a good place to live. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Lynn Hagerman, and I live at 3058 61st Avenue Southeast on Mercer Island. And the best way to picture where I live is right across the street from the current Proctor commercial-sized project that's being built under municipal codes. I'm here to speak on the topic of Agenda 3, residential codes. I want to thank the council, really genuinely thank you for hearing residents who are difficult to organize. They're all busy. We're not as organized as the real estate developers and their interests. And so thank you for hearing us and putting this agenda item on the Planning Commission's agenda. And I have met with individuals of you, Deputy Mayor Bertlin, Councilmember Don Grass, Mayor Brian Bassett individually, and I've written to Councilmember Benson Long and voted for some of you also. I'm very, very glad that this is on the agenda, and I'm here to ask that the scope of the review include, in addition to looking at tree retention and what happens with plots that are subdivided, to look at the issue of what happens when multiple lots are developed under a residential code. And there is no way that I can tell you what the 4 years of construction has been like. Noise, cracks in my home, dirt, the soil removal that has happened at that project and the project around the corner now where there's going to be a 12 to 14 bedroom home on 2 lots. Across from me, it's 4 lots combined that we're now going to face a wall that's a gazebo that includes a 30-foot concrete 2 sets of walls that are 21 by 26 feet as part of the project that is in the code because it's a single-family lot that was combined with other lots. So I won't go into the detail. We can do that during the public hearing. I'm requesting that the issue of multiple lots being combined into what the city itself has acknowledged, representatives of the city have acknowledged that it is a commercial project, be looked at. And I would also like the public process to be expanded. I was disappointed to see that there's 1 public hearing, and when we only have 3 minutes in other settings or a little gathering of a poster discussion. 1 public hearing is not enough on this, and you folks may be facing a Plan B. I hope it would be as constructive as the library, but I think it might be good to go into it in the beginning with more of a public process since it affects the whole island. I'd like to invoke the memory of Aubrey Davis, who's been an icon for me. He was the mayor here. I worked for him at Group Health when he was the CEO there, who looked at his role as a servant leader, as a trustee for the future. And I'd like you all to think about who inspires you in a way that you can serve as a trustee for the quality of life on this island, because this is the only place that gets looked at in the collective. Rather than individuals doing what's okay under the code, and they're doing what I don't want to malign any individual, but they're not looking at the whole. I'd like you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Mary Mahoney. I live at 3024 60th Avenue Southeast. I am ground zero for the 28,000 square foot home that's being built across the street. This house is bigger than the Clock Tower building. The Clock Tower building is about just under 26,000 square feet. And this, if you don't know the neighborhood, this is the old East Seattle neighborhood. 60th Avenue is the boulevard that was originally going to support the downtown. So we've got a wider road, it's a road that people walk all the time. One of the very few places, I can't even think of another place, and I grew up on Mercer Island, where you can walk down a street by the lake. The lake property is so isolated from the rest of us. And this is really the one place that you can walk down 60th and look between the houses and see the lake and a beautiful neighborhood. And now what we have is two lots that were joined, 120 feet wide each. It's now, 240-foot wide lot. We have a 210-foot building in front of us. That's the length of it. That's the street length of it. That's 2/3 of a football field on what was a beautiful neighborhood street. And there was no notification of what was happening. Nobody's telling us, oh, they're going to join these lots, and there was nothing ever posted. And we just end up having to live with it and deal with it. And it's really impacting our neighborhood. We're right around the corner from the property Lynn's been describing. And it just doesn't seem like there's any way that anybody's paying attention. I think the last meeting we had, a lot of the things on the agenda were the kind of things we brought up. But it's the neighborhood character that is disappearing with these monster houses. And I gotta believe that matters. I know you get to build a big house if you got money and, you've got a good plan. But when it so hugely impacts a neighborhood like ours, where mine's a 60-foot lot, the house next door is 60 feet, maybe 90 feet of lot. They're older. I think mine was one of the original cottages, and that was what made that neighborhood so lovely. And now it's just turning into one big commercial project. I'd rather see a boutique hotel across the street, something that everybody could use if we're going to go commercial. But anyway, I thank you, and I'm glad to see it on your agenda, and I'll say good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Cheryl Schumacher, and I live at 3040 60th Avenue Southeast, right across from the same house that Molly was talking about. And again, I think I just want to express the importance of the character of our neighborhood. I grew up on Mercer Island, lived here since 1954, have lived in this particular East Seattle area for 38 years. I've lived in a cottage that was built in 1930. I lived in a Hilt house that was 1901, and now I live in a house that was 1904. I live in these houses because I want to preserve the character, the history of Mercer Island. And, I'm really glad that you guys are looking at the scope. And I think what is important to me is at least I have a road in front of me, but a lot of the places that are being impacted do not have a road in front of them. They don't have the distance of the road. They just stare at a cement wall. And I really think we need to do something about this. We're losing the character. People are losing views. And it's just, I'm glad to see that you're addressing it, and I just hope that you will really see the impact that it has on a lot of lives and the livability for us now of our property. So anyway, I just wanted to express that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next. Hi, I'm Kai Anderson. I live at 6004 Southeast 32nd. I refer to it as Ground Zero these days. I live directly across the street from the Proctor Landing project that has gone on now for 3.5 years. At the beginning, we were told it would be 18 months. It is now 3.5 years, and I would like to encourage all of you council members to come and walk my neighborhood. I'd like you to come during the daytime when there are dump trucks coming from one direction, cement trucks coming from another direction, no one manning the street, kids on bikes coming around the corner. It's a miracle no one's been killed down there, first of all. Second of all, the quality of life has just been horrible. I leave my house most days. 7:20, the beeping starts with all these trucks, permanent cranes. 150 to 200 workers are working across the street from me daily. And this is from the project manager's voice. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago. So it is a commercial, basically, project that falls within the zoning and the regulations that we currently have. And, the effect on the neighborhood and quality of life has just been awful. It used to be a nice, serene place to live. I moved in there 15 years ago. And now with the new project, 4 houses down and around the corner, we're looking at 4 more years, at least, of the same types of impact. So it's not just happening in our corner. I hope it doesn't happen to any of you. But I just feel that these commercial-sized projects don't belong in neighborhoods, and if they do, they need to have a start and a finish. They should not be having extensions granted right and left and variances granted right and left. I know that the city is short-staffed now in terms of the building department and keeping tabs on these projects, but we as citizens feel like we have to police what's happening and complain and try and figure out who to talk to in the city if we have a concern, because the contractors and the owners seem to be doing just whatever they feel like doing and are not being monitored by anybody that we can see, and that really creates a lot of problems too. So, but I thank you for your attention, and we're trying not to lose it down in our little area, but it's really it's not pleasant down there, and I invite all of you to come. I'd love you to come sometime during the workday, not at 5 o'clock when the dust is settled and the 200 people are not over there in hard hats. But thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marianne Bond, and I live at 3014 60th Avenue, right across the street from the newest house that is going in, 27,000 square feet. It is horrible. I really, really, really would encourage all of you, please come down, spend a day in my front yard, and just sit there. Also, look at the Boys and Girls Club and look at the cars in that parking lot. Those are all cars, workmen's cars for the Proctor Landing job. And we can all stand up here and tell you all this, but until you come down and really see it, you will not believe it. I have counted cement trucks going, there's like 10, 15 an hour. Dump trucks with gravel. We even have a conveyor belt that's throwing the gravel into the hole. It's unbelievable. The cranes down at the Proctor Landing job. These are commercial cranes. These do not belong in residential areas. You really, 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 we've got to get a grip on this building. It's just ridiculous. So please, please, come on down. Knock on my door. I've got lawn furniture out. Come and sit down and watch this. Please. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other people wishing to comment? Okay. One more person coming? Okay.
Hello. My name is Mark Cohen. I live on First Hill. I emailed my wife was supposed to do this. She just got out of it. So I'll get her back. Don't worry about it. I'm not sure I submitted this, but I added some comments. Is it okay to read? Okay, so this is regarding the deviation from J-Mark for the 5% on 74th, but it's my comments in general regarding things. So I emailed Wendy back and forth about the Seattle Weekly article about is Seattle doing enough for its canopy. Basically, they have an article that's just written on Wednesday about the development and all the kind of craziness that Seattle is facing with its green space and, its call for density. And they've put a lot of codes and things in place, and they've been battled against by developers and things like that. So I think it kind of, it's in my comments that I submitted the link to this article. I think it encapsulates what we are going through right now. So I've lived in my house on First Hill for close to 17 years, and in that time I have seen great reduction in permeable surfaces. Many of these spaces with large trees on them, the change to the landscape has been dramatic and has been had dire consequences. There's been an increase in flooding, greater temperatures due to lack of shade, and the neighborhood aesthetic has not been as attractive as it once had been. Trees create an ecosystem to provide habitat and food for birds and other animals. Trees absorb carbon dioxide and potentially harmful gases such as sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide from the air and release oxygen. One large tree can supply a day's supply of oxygen for 4 people. Trees can add value to your home, help cool your home and your neighborhood, break the cold winds to lower your heating costs, provide food for wildlife, filter toxins, help prevent erosion, and contribute to the overall well-being for the people. Currently, my street is undergoing a large storm drain project by the city at significant cost. This is not an anomaly. It is a direct result of the destruction that has been meted out by developers to our natural environment. Although most developers make a concerted effort to build houses in symbiosis with the neighborhood, I have seen others like J-Mark who consistently push the limits and boundaries of best practices by building the largest possible houses and asking for impervious deviations. The problem doesn't just lie with J-Mark, however. Private homeowners are equally responsible for taking down many large trees. Even though a city code is written to replace those trees, it does not provide an equitable solution. Is this right?
It is. I'm going to have to ask you to finish up pretty quickly.
Okay. Shoot. All right. I'll just conclude with my closing arguments. Basically, there hasn't been a day in the last few years when the serenity of my neighborhood hasn't been interrupted by the grinding of a chainsaw or a steady stream of construction trucks. Trees that I took for granted that have grown for hundreds of years and shaded my dog and I on walks and were removed in several hours. What hubris do we have in our limited lifespan window to not be forward-thinking so that future islanders can reap the benefit of our efforts to not prioritize money and materialism? This is my last paragraph. It is easier to protect what we have now than to replace what we have lost later. How likely is it that a 5% deviation room addition will later be returned to permeable surface and be planted with trees? What is the sense in 2 people growing old in a 4,500 to 5,000 foot square house?
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up, please.
Last sentence, isn't it a better legacy to show some restraint for the sake of the global good? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else? Last call? All right, seeing none, appearances is now closed. So the next item of business is the consent calendar. We have removed AB 5205, the interlocal agreement with MISD for counseling services. We've removed it from the agenda due to some versioning concerns that will come back to us in September, and that just leaves the payables and payroll reports and the July 19th, 2016 meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve? So moved. Second? Second. All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Consent calendar is approved. We now move to regular business, and the first item is AB 5206, Single-Family Residential Development Standards, Scope of Work, Approach, and Public Engagement Plan. So we're going to welcome Planning Manager Evan Maxim and Scott Greenberg. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to introduce Evan, but you did it so well, I will just step back and let Evan lead you through his presentation.
Well,
We're happy to take time for questions.
I wasn't here at the last meeting, admittedly. Evan, have you been introduced to the community?
Not in so many words, no.
Well, welcome to Mercer Island and DSG. Do you want to just say a few words about yourself?
Sure.
Great.
Pardon me, Mayor. My name is, Deputy Mayor and council members. My name is Evan Maxim. I'm the recently hired planning manager for the city of Mercer Island. I just recently left the city of Sammamish, where I had been employed as a land use planner for 14, 15 years. And before that, I actually was with the city of Issaquah many years ago, working for Scott Greenberg when he was representing that city on the Planning Policy Commission. I have a background both in implementation, if you will, of land use regulations, development review, and policy development, which I hope I can actually use for some benefit here on the city of Mercer Island. Most recently at the city of Sammamish, I've been involved in their town center implementation. They're working on the town center too, and with their critical areas regulation updates. And we were just starting the same conversation when I left. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. I'll jump right into the PowerPoint.
Go for it.
That works for it. So I have about 11 slides to run through here tonight. Really what I'm trying to cover is just the approach that we've put together for the City Council and the Planning Commission on evaluating the residential development standards that are currently in the municipal code. I have laid out the draft scope of work, if you will. This is coming from first the council's direction back in January. The Planning Commission had input most recently at the last meeting in July. And of course you have input tonight. And then we have our public engagement plan, and what I'm seeking really at the end of the night tonight, if I can, is the council approval of those three items: scope of work, the approach, and the engagement plan, so we can begin our work in September. So the first is really around the first item I'd like to call to your attention is really around the policy-based approach. What we're doing with this approach is first looking at our policy goals as relates to a specific policy issue. And you can see on the screen in front of you the italicized text is essentially the problem statement that we've identified on the part of the city staff that we are looking to address through this exercise. So that problem statement or that policy issue is the rapidly changing character of Mercer Island single-family neighborhoods. There are a lot of different aspects to that problem statement, if you will, which we've then derived into specific areas of focus, and I'll get to those in a moment. In evaluating that problem statement, that policy issue, we are looking for adopted relevant city policies and goals. For example, of course, from your recently updated comprehensive plan. Those policy statements and policy goals will be the source for the Planning Commission's review of what best action to recommend to the City Council in addressing any specific aspect of the change. Second part of this approach, of course, is to look at those specific areas of focus, identify the relevant policies and goals, identify a proposed approach, if you will, to the amendment, and I'll lay this out in a little bit more concrete detail in a moment, and evaluate that proposed solution in terms of expected positive and negative effects resulting from the solution. What that translates into in a concrete fashion is really using an evaluation form. And the evaluation form, we've mocked one up just to help the Planning Commission begin to look at what types of information we would have on that form. The evaluation form is intended to be essentially a two-page summary of all of the relevant inputs, if you will, into the policy decision in front of first the Planning Commission and then, of course, the Council when you get to your own deliberations. Those inputs would include, of course, the specific draft amendment option, the relevant comprehensive plan policies, the expected effect or intent of the regulatory change. So in the context of tree retention, what is the effect we're trying to achieve? Is it aesthetic? Is it sustainable development, as you heard alluded to tonight? Is it a reduction in stormwater runoff? The positive and negative aspects of that policy change. So picking on the tree retention example for a moment, what does it do in terms of property owner rights and flexibility on their site?
what are we seeing in terms of an actual environmental benefit in tree retention. And then, of course, on those evaluation forms, we'll have a reference into background documentation, if you will, into the actual draft regulations, so people being the Planning Commission, the community, or the council, can see the specific wording of the language that's changed, and any relevant public comment that we receive during the process. One of the important things to note about the evaluation forms is these are the Planning Commission's documents at the end of the day. So these are intended to be summary documents that capture all of the analysis that the Planning Commission will do before they make the recommendation to the City Council. It's intended to be a good snapshot of a large volume of information, and if you're interested, you can drill into the actual background information as well. So that's the evaluation forms in the proposed approach. If I may, I'm going to switch on now to the scope of work. Again, the policy issue is the same one that I've laid out for you a moment ago, and that's the rapidly changing character of Mercer Island's single-family neighborhoods. We're seeing this policy issue, if you will, develop essentially in two areas of development right now, or that's what we've identified in our scope. The first is related to new subdivision, so splitting lots in half or in 3 or in 4 pieces, where previously we had one relatively large lot. The other aspect, of course, is new single-family home construction, where we're seeing the tear-down of existing single-family homes or the development of vacant lots. And of course, as we heard tonight, sometimes you see the tear-down of 2 homes, a consolidation, and a construction of one much larger home. And I think what you'll see in a moment here is that scope of work, in terms of areas of focus, we have tried to set this very, very broadly. So almost anything that we've heard brought up, or pardon me, anything we have heard brought up by the public at this point, we've put into this scope of work with one notable exception, and I'll get to that in a moment. So within this area of focus, we're looking at things like building height, gross floor area. A moment ago we heard about the Proctor Lane project. Lot consolidation on the right-hand side of that list. Maximum lot area is another one we've added since the Planning Commission meeting, as I said, at the end of July. Deviations, the public process. Should we be requiring more public notification? Tree retention I alluded to a moment ago. Large residential accessory structures. I've heard a fair bit already about an outdoor living space, gazebo, patio area. And that's part of that scope right now. It's intended to be very broad. What this doesn't include a few items, and I can go into what it doesn't include if that's of council interest at some point. I saw a couple of nods, so I'll just run with it for a moment. What we are not currently within our scope of work are things that we haven't heard from the community yet. So outdoor lighting, color, I dare to say, and typically there's some drawbacks of getting into color, but haven't heard much on color. Parking, things of that nature really aren't in the scope, at least at this moment. And it's come up a little bit in the council discussion and in the community discussion. This is really aimed right now at the single-family development, so we're not getting into the multifamily development. And if you'll bear with me for a moment, I'll have a slide specifically to that point. So there are 2 notable exceptions to the scope of work that were brought up in front of our Planning Commission perhaps 2 weeks ago. The first is really related to something Mr. Reed brought up a moment ago, the religious institutions, the Emmanuel Church, in residential zones and how those are handled. The Planning Commission did recommend that the City Council add that to the DSG work plan, either as part of this exercise or more likely as part of a standalone code amendment exercise. So we're conveying that back, of course, to the City Council. The other is taking another comprehensive review of all residential standards, including the multifamily standards. These will be multifamily outside of the town center, so we're not going back into the town center sandbox, if you will, at least at this time. The idea, I think, on the part of the Planning Commission was really taking a proactive review of all of the residential development standards and maybe getting away from a little bit of the reactive response that we're seeing drive some of this scope of work.
Can you actually just give us an example of what that would be, of multifamily? What comprehensive review of all residential standards, including multifamily, outside of the town center? Outside of the town center.
So in the conversation with the Planning Commission, there was some discussion around should we be looking at, for example, lot size, open space area, density, tree retention in the multifamily zones. outside of town center. At the time, as I understood the scope, we were really focusing on our single-family residential development standards, so I noted that to the Planning Commission, and they indicated that they wanted me to convey this up and really have the DSG staff and the City Council and Planning Commission take a more broad look at all of Title 19, if you will, and evaluate whether or not that was the set of regulations that really was serving the council intent given the new comprehensive plan update. Does that answer your question, Deputy Mayor? So I'm switching off of the scope of work, at least for this initial introduction comments. We have developed a public engagement plan, which I understand is very similar to the town center public engagement plan that you just went through. We are looking at, of course, our regular planning commission meetings. We are looking at several larger community meetings, community input meetings, if you will, charrettes, open house type of events. At least two, I think, are in our draft concept at this point, and perhaps more will be added depending on the scope. We have a Planning Commission public hearings. I did hear some comment tonight about the number of public hearings in front of the Planning Commission. I'll observe it's certainly true in my past experience, and I believe it's true in the past experience for Mercer Island, that the Planning Commission public hearings aren't limited to a single night. We are required to have a public hearing, but it could be over several nights if that's the direction of the City Council. And of course, the Council has the option to also hold its own public hearing after the Planning Commission recommendation. We are encouraging that public comment be put in writing and likely tracked through our website. The benefit of putting the public comment in writing, certainly we can get the audio and maybe even some typed comments from this type of activity, but the challenge with that is, of course, if you don't have the public comment in writing, it's subject to characterization if I'm trying to relay it to you, even if I'm doing my best in terms of relaying it to you in a true and honest manner. I always seem to miss something, and so we're really trying to encourage that public comment in writing. And of course, we've seen a lot of it in our email record so far. Now we are looking at the broad notification through the website, the email, the social media, looking at A-frame signs, posters. I don't think it's on this board, but we are looking at the kind of targeted group meetings with, for example, the Rotary Club or the Chamber of Commerce or the building community. Pardon me.
Point of clarification. Do you want to clarify? We can ask questions as we go along, or we can save them for the end, however we want.
I'll defer to you.
Well, I asked a question, so I would be hard-pressed to say. Go for it.
Well, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Evan, with respect to the public engagement process, I know a number of City Council members, Councilmember Sanderson in particular, has raised questions or the desire to review the town center public engagement process that we had. And I know that you mentioned that this public engagement process is tailored or similar to the town center engagement process. So I guess, given the fact that there was some criticism raised about the town center public engagement process, I'm kind of curious about the differences in this proposed engagement process. Are we addressing some of the concerns that have been raised in the past? And if so, can you elaborate on that? I see Allison jump to your defense.
Hi, Allison Van Gorp, your Ombudsman and Administrative Services Manager in DSG. As you know, Evan was not here for the Town Center process, so I thought I would jump in to help answer this question. We're certainly planning to learn from our experience in Town Center and try to improve and build on the process we use there. One of those lessons is that we want to try to plan out the whole public engagement process from the front end so that the public can really understand where the opportunities are to make comments and to get involved, and that the process isn't evolving and changing over time and making it confusing about when decisions are being made or when's the right time to come and make a comment. So we're trying hard to lay out a process that makes sense and provides opportunities to comment at kind of opportune times in the process where they can appropriately influence the decisions that are being made. So we've tied the timing of larger community meetings and public hearings to fit in with the schedule that Evan's putting together in terms of when the Planning Commission will be evaluating policies and making their decisions. And then in terms of looking directly at the town center process. I think there's talk amongst the city manager's office about having some kind of a debrief to talk with city council and staff and perhaps some of the commissioners about what worked well with town center, what didn't work as well, what can we learn from it and use in this process with the residential development standards and others going forward. So we're looking to schedule some kind of a meeting or perhaps some one-on-one conversations to that end in the next month or so.
Go ahead and continue if you want.
I think I'm down to 2 slides, so I'll do my best to wrap up. So schedule parameters, as Allison just mentioned, we are in the process of developing a schedule, and what I'd like to do is report back to you, probably through the city manager's report or some other type of indirect communication, if you will, on our final schedule when we get into September and we have our nailed down scope of work. It is dependent on the final scope of work and the priorities that the council assigns to that scope of work in terms of what that schedule looks like. So if for example, we decided to add the color of homes to our scope of work, that is something that can be a fairly intense subject, if you will, and may affect our overall calendaring. We are intending to aim primarily at the regular Planning Commission meeting nights for most of our public outreach. We're trying to get 2 or more of those areas of focus discussed, at least in a preliminary fashion, with the Planning Commission each night. As we go through the review process using those evaluation forms, one of the benefits of that evaluation form is it allows for a fairly systematic review of a specific area of focus, which means that we may be going back to the Planning Commission multiple times to really refine down a specific development regulation to achieve the effect that we're trying to achieve. The Planning Commission, in their comments to the city staff in asking us to relay them back to the city council, did recognize that there needed to be a balance between getting the overall project done and doing it right. And as part of that, they acknowledged that that may mean that we're possibly sliding past the end of the year with the current scope that they had recommended to you. And so with that, Deputy Mayor and Council, I'm on to the next steps, really looking at August and September, assuming that we have an approval tonight of developing our materials and our actual final schedule. September 7th, we have our Planning Commission kickoff planned, and then we would begin our really getting into the weeds of the substantive review, if you will, on September 21st. I'm happy to answer any questions or get out of the way.
Council, any questions?
Comments also, or just questions?
Questions at this time, I think. Jeff?
I'll dive in and cut me off and go to other people. Benson stole my first question because I think it's a really good one, which is sort of, and I look more to sort of Scott and Allison. I mean, are there more lessons from the town center? I do think right up at the beginning there's a bunch of things to be done to do this well and right. And I think you've started. Welcome aboard. I look forward to working with you. Are there, 3 to 5 lessons from the town center process that you've already begun to apply here? I mean, I think I heard Allison address at least one of them, but I mean, if you could say up front what kinds of things we're applying to what we learned there to make this a widely inclusive, comprehensive, and excellent.
Sounds like an interview question. I think there's a lot of things that we can learn, and I think one is what I mentioned earlier, having a clear schedule, helping the public see where they can get involved and how they can have impact on the process and the decisions being made. I think another would be, having that clear line with the evaluation forms from the different options that are on the table to the recommendation and decision that's finally made, so that people can kind of see the work that's done by the Planning Commission or by the council in making their decisions. Kind of showing our work, so to speak. Thinking on my feet, so pardon me. Yeah, go ahead.
So the other thing, and it's not just public engagement, it's the whole process. The town center had a lot of different types of groups involved. We had a council subcommittee at various points in times. We had a liaison group, which was, 3 council members, 3 planning commissioners, 3 design commissioners. We had a 42-member stakeholder group, before that a 29-member stakeholder group, a number of different consultants, and I know that one thing that we were hearing from the public quite a bit was the process lacked some level of transparency. A lot of it was transparent, but there were things where people didn't quite understand how a particular policy discussion got from point A to point B. What we're proposing, at least at this point, is this is all staff, planning commission, and city council centric. No consultants. I mean, we may need to consult an arborist, maybe other than our city arborist, or maybe get him involved. But really, this is as part of why you approved an additional staff position, is so that we could do this kind of work in-house. So to me, the biggest thing is I think that at the end of this process, hopefully, our goal is that this is a totally transparent process. Not that the other wasn't transparent, but I think this will be more transparent.
Wendy?
So, page 3 of the agenda bill, it talks about land use appeals for Micah and the French American School. I wonder if you could talk about how that's included in this, or what that timing means, as well as this last paragraph about requiring fire sprinklers in all new homes. That seems like a solution before a policy discussion, so I'm just curious about those two paragraphs.
Okay. The reference to Micah and the French American School is simply, it's an example of two applications we actually have in right now that we're starting to review, that the Planning Commission will also need to review and I'm hesitating, and make decisions or recommendations on. So even though we are planning a schedule and we're saying we're going to use just about every regular Planning Commission meeting, there will be points this fall where we won't be able to spend any commission time on this issue because they might be busy for the entire evening talking about a code amendment for Micah or the French American School's conditional use permit. So it's not part of this process, but it's part of their schedule and their work. And then, what was it? I'm sorry, what's the second question? Fire sprinklers. That's something that I think was coming to council earlier this year. Maybe Pam can speak to that.
Yes, I can clarify that. The fire sprinkler ordinance doesn't go to the Planning Commission. It comes directly to the council, but unfortunately, Chief Heitman isn't here right now, but they went through a public process, and they didn't get very much involvement. They invited many builders, they invited public and others, and they got a very, very small turnout. So the problem, but it affects single-family residences. So in talking it through, it seemed that it would be better to sort of piggyback, if you will, on the public process for this, which is hopefully going to bring out a lot more public engagement than they were able to accomplish. So they won't be done together because they're in different parts of the code, but they'll be done in parallel and feed each other's through the public engagement process. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. Dave?
So, this is for Scott. I think that, the town center process, I think there's a lot of feedback that it didn't go as well as people had hoped. I think there was a lot of sentiment about that in the public. And when we talk about going back into something that I think is an even hotter topic, because it's about where people live and their next door neighbor, and we hear some extremely emotional testimony just tonight, right? It's a big deal. And I would like to see us as a council agree that before we jump back into this, I'd like to know exactly what we're going to do different from what we did in the town center process before we embark on this journey. Would like to get some concurrence from my peers here. I have a question about the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission is then directed by you to reflect on the citizen input in terms of the recommendation. And one of the things that happened, I think, with Town Center is we had some Joint Commission members that, in fact, said publicly, I know that's what the public said, but I'm going to go in this different direction. So I would like to understand what assurance that the public has that their input is going to be taken and directed into policy by that commission.
Well, that's not a question I can answer. That's something that each commissioner would have to answer. The commission would hear the public comments, public testimony, or read the public comments, and it's up to each individual commissioner to decide how he or she uses that comment.
Okay. Just like the city council.
Like the city council, exactly.
And Evan, welcome. We're glad you're here because this is clearly a radioactive topic that needs to be defused soon. You said something about, in your presentation, maximum lot size as something we would control. And maybe I just didn't understand that. Is that, you're saying there would be we would want to limit the size a lot could be in total?
I think that's one of the items for the Planning Commission and the City Council to evaluate as part of this exercise. You know, the Proctor Lane project, I'm picking on that project at the moment, there are several like it, was partially the result of a consolidation of two existing lots, two existing homes into one site, which allowed for a much larger gross floor area and a much larger lot coverage allowance. It may also not be all that consistent with the underlying zoning in that area of the city. So one question I think that the City Council and Planning Commission can evaluate is whether or not we want to regulate the maximum lot size that results from a lot consolidation and its effects in that neighborhood. And there are several different ways that we could. The temptation here is often to jump immediately to the end game, the solution. And I want to push back on that a little bit, so I just threw out one option, which would be to limit overall maximum lot size, such as saying no lot consolidation shall result in a lot of X square feet. The challenge with that type of approach, of course, is that you potentially run the risk of effectively two things. One, not getting the effect that you're trying to get out of that type of exercise, and two, not necessarily being consistent with the other comprehensive plan policies that you may have that you failed to consider in that proposal. So the approach that we've tried to develop really takes us the other way down to a solution like that, and then tries to help the Planning Commission and City Council evaluate the pros and cons, if you will.
Thanks.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just didn't understand that. Thank you.
Benson?
This question is actually probably directed at our city attorney. You know, during this process, as the Planning Commission is looking at formulating different recommendations, are they going to be advised, and also I guess the City Council, as to the limitations on suggested changes relative to property rights and what impact that has?
I'll certainly be providing guidance regarding what state law allows, but this is an area where it's my understanding that cities have some latitude and can tailor the regulations to suit the policy goals of the city. So I'll be trying to, when asked to do so, provide parameters if there are parameters. But with regard to specific property rights, I mean, really I would say that those are up to each private property owner to try to ensure are protected, and usually they're engaged at some point in a process, but not at this policy level. Usually when it's a more site-specific project that has an application pending, that's when they get involved.
Okay, but obviously you'll be available, I mean, if questions come up, whether or not a recommendation perhaps is going too far, at least in your opinion, based on the law or how you interpret it?
Certainly. My office always works closely with DSG to just make sure that we're within the bounds of the law.
Okay. Thanks.
I'm going to go ahead and take a spin at this. So And I'll apologize because to a certain extent I'm going to harken back to what was, at least in my memory or recent memory, one of the more painful council meetings that we had in the last year, and that was the first one in December. And that's when there was discussion about a residential building moratorium that came forward. At that point, I read actually what was a statement that I'd sent to several of the community members, both for and against it at the time, and one of the things that I had called out that was very, very important to me, and that was the opportunity for the community to have an intense awareness that this process and discussion was beginning, and second, for that same community to be able to participate actively in determining what the scope is. So getting to the question, I'd like to understand how you and the Planning Commission developed this proposed scope, hopefully sharing with me multiple iterations of reaching out to the community, and particularly the 30-plus people who showed up here and spoke in December, that this activity is beginning.
So, Deputy Mayor, I'll start with where I started, which is probably the most logical approach for me, and then perhaps some of the others in the audience may want to add to that in a moment. When I arrived at the city of Mercer Island, When I arrived at the city of Mercer Island, I certainly reviewed the materials that were presented back in December and January as part of our initial scope setting exercise with the Planning Commission. There were numerous conversations and honestly public contact, if you will, through email primarily around things like deviations, tree removals related to specific building permits, things of that nature that also went into that initial draft scope that I developed. Once we had put that together, we went to the Planning Commission and we presented that to them. There were many of the people in the audience that you heard speaking tonight were at the Planning Commission meeting. And the idea behind this scope, the areas of focus that we've identified here, was to set these as very broad areas for us to talk about. So I say that because I've yet to hear something in the public comment, at least tonight, that I don't think fits under one of these general areas that we could then have a fruitful conversation with the Planning Commission about. Having said that, we did not do a large community outreach prior to that Planning Commission meeting.
What type of outreach did you do?
I believe it was the standard approach that we use for public meetings for Planning Commission, so it was likely published on our website.
Okay, because I'll be honest, I'm frustrated because I went into the MI Weekly, there was nothing noticed in there. What little I saw did come through notice of the Planning Commission meeting, and again, I would just remind ourselves that this was an intense meeting in December where over 30 people got up to speak about the process and the issues of residential development. And I'm very concerned if we're going to agree on a scope tonight without due respect for the effort and energy that the community went through to ensure that those same people, as well as the rest of the community, have the opportunity to come forward. And a specific example I would give you is in my neighborhood, my micro part of First Hill. There is distinct concern about parking because several of the existing smaller homes have garages in the back, and that is a part of their character and a part of the way they'd like to redevelop their property. So for us to go too far at this point in confirming or even overtly rejecting the scope without having reached out to the community and given them the chance to weigh in on this would be very uncomfortable for me. So it's a question that was answered, but then I'm going to just be pretty blunt in saying I think we might be ahead of ourselves. Dan?
So also having been a significant participant in the December uprising, I will say this, that I think the list you've got already is a really good start. And I agree with Debbie that we need to make sure that it's complete. And fortunately, that there is if we start with a group of people who were involved back then, and I include both on the real estate side and then the citizen side, then we'll be able to round this thing out and make sure we've got a complete list. But you've got enough here to get the Planning Commission moving on, I mean, that's critical. What is absolutely critical to me is we not lose time. So if you cover all these areas and then add some more to it, that's great. But I would hate to see us lose another month just to add more items to the list, because I don't want to lose another month. Second thing, I will thank you, Evan, for really jumping on this and putting together. And I was at the Planning Commission when you made your presentation. I thought you did a great job. I thought the Planning Commission was very responsive, and I think you're going to have a good relationship working with the Planning Commission, so I'm very encouraged by that. I will throw out a couple of additional areas that, again, being part of the December group, things like enforcement tools and penalties. I know that I've had discussions even with the city attorney's office, and they're somewhat frustrated that they don't have necessarily the arsenal of enforcement possibilities, so that if someone violates the code, they may not feel like they have enough heft to make it painful for that enforcement. I would, another thing that one of the members of the public alluded to tonight, the whole issue of building permits. Right now, there is no public visibility to building permits. There's no notice that goes out. The public, I mean, a building permit can be issued with the public being clueless that it was even applied for. And there's no opportunity, as I was told by Allison, there's absolutely no opportunity to appeal a building permit if you're a member of the public. And I think that we need to make sure at least that one of the topics is considered is how does the public learn about building permits, how is there an opportunity for public input, and is there an appeal process that wants to be created, that should be created. A third area I would throw out there is fences. I personally find that wall that was put on the Proctor Landing project to be an abomination, and that came out of a city variance that was granted. And I'm not going to go back and question it, but I think it is truly unfortunate that this concrete monstrosity is sitting there till the end of time. And we are seeing fence deviation requests that are coming up on a regular basis, and I personally want to see that issue addressed by the Planning Commission as to whether we need to consider fence deviations and whether we're going to turn ourselves into a gated community, which unfortunately seems to be happening in some neighborhoods. The issue that again, I think Lynn raised, or I think Kyle raised it actually, the time limits for the permits. I don't think that's in here. Is a permit, once a permit's issued, how long does someone have to do the work? And again, I don't know what the answer is, but I would ask that to be a topic that's looked at. And the last thing I have on my list is short plats. As Scott and Allison, I think you are well aware of, I'm dealing with a short plat issue myself, and it's raised some questions as to our short plat process and whether people can circumvent that. Rather than bore the council with the details of that, I would want to make sure that we have mechanisms in place that if it's a city policy that to short plat a property, that if you're going to do two building lots on an existing single lot, that we're going to either require them to short plat the property or we're not going to require them to short plat the property. But we make a decision in our code as to how we're proceeding on this and not do what's happened on the First Hill neighborhood. Last thing I'll mention has nothing to do with this project, but it's been bugging me. You know, we talked in the last few meetings about name changes, and it has struck me that we have a department which is named Development Services. And maybe it's time we think about what the purpose of Development Services should be. And maybe it should be renamed something like Community Enhancement Group. So it's something which creates that we communicate to the citizens of Southern that the purpose of what is now Development Services should be community enhancement. And maybe that's community enhancement through development, and it's community enhancement through maintaining the character of our community, but that we are actually looking not to provide services to developers, but to enhance our community. So I will bring that up during the budget discussion, but I just wanted to flag that as that's coming. So, because I feel like this is a great project, and I think now part of crystallizing this is to make sure that the public face of Scott's team is community enhancement and not helping developers.
Well, we've definitely moved from questions into council statement. I was in there long too. So now I guess we'll formally move into council statements.
Following your lead.
Yeah, exactly. And if anybody would actually like to make a motion, that could also promote the conversation as well. So, Jeff?
Well, I mean, I'm just going to take the question marks off the stuff I have here, and we'll just talk through it. Just a couple of things, because I won't get into it, Dave, in terms of how we characterize the town center, but I think there's a couple of points I want to make. First of all, is I want to build on, Deb and Dan's gathering, Evan, of all the input that we have today. I have the email from Mark Russo of JMark that offered a bunch of white papers and their cooperation. I do agree that to the extent we can avoid consultants, to the extent we can avoid, that kind of thing is a great idea. Not creating other groups, like a stakeholder group, but there are stakeholders in this process that are on all sides, residents, etc. People who want to sell their houses, whose interests are different from the people who want to buy or the people who want to continue to live in the neighborhood. So that's number one. So if you have all those, that's great. The second is, and third is really the bookends. One is the question, and it's a really hard question, of how do we define what is the character of Mercer Island? Because if we don't have that top statement and a very clear vision of it, we don't know what to measure against it. A statement that allows us to say, you know what, 26,000 square foot homes are not part of the character, or they're not part of the character in neighborhoods that don't have those homes to begin with. And so unless we are able to define what the character is in words that everybody can listen to, react to, because that kind of came late in the process, I don't know that we have any of these suggestions to measure against. And then lastly, in terms of budget, the other thing that happened certainly in the town center is that there was all sorts of work we wanted to do, and you had to keep coming back to the well, Scott, and getting money. I think there is communications. We're going to want to spend money to reach the maximum number of people in our community that we can to get their input and get that solicited. And so there's money there. And I also think that there's some, research that we're going to want to do that is more formalized and organized, because again, when you have vocal people, they may represent the interests of what everybody thinks in our community, but I'd really like to know that this time in a way that says, okay, a bunch of ideas have come. Now, the nice thing here is, unlike the town center where we had a moratorium that was about to expire, and I thought we felt like we were up against, because we had extended it about as far as it could go, here we have a little bit of time. I want to have urgency, because this is a big, big issue, but at the same time, I want us to do this right, which means that when we have ideas, I want you to come regularly to the council, present them, and then bring that back to the planning commission instead of getting a joint commission recommendation that we fuddle with on our own and don't send back for processing, A, and B, that we don't get a bunch of ideas that we then don't take out to the public and run those ideas past them and see what they think of them in a fairly organized way that allows us to say, hey, we've done, we've made progress, we've done something that the public at large knows about what we're doing and has given us feedback that, yes, this is the direction they think we should go.
Any other council members? Dave? And then Benson?
Benson might be more interesting if he wants to go first.
I don't know about that. No, actually, I have a question, so if you want to go to a statement, then that's okay, but I have a question.
You're talking already, so keep
Okay. I want to go back to the question regarding the religious institutions, and what is the, what is the game plan? What are you folks actually recommending how we proceed in addressing the issues that have been raised for the past couple of meetings that we've had? And I guess, so that's in general. And then more specifically, and I know you probably can't answer this, but obviously the Emmanuel Church has come a couple of times, and any kind of change, I would think, is maybe too late for whatever project that they're proposing. I don't know if it is or not, but if you can give us an idea what the time frame that you folks think. Obviously, Planning Commission is doing a lot of work. They are to be commended once again. And so I don't necessarily want to add to their plate, but I'm also concerned about timing issues.
So to the first question, the approach to the Emmanuel Church situation, if you will, and I guess I would suggest that the council likely wants to broaden that scope to religious institutions in residential zones, because I don't know if it's really an issue simply with that particular facility. What I would tend to recommend is that we look at this as a standalone code amendment after we adequately scope it out with the church, with the religious institutions. So really right now, my personal contact with the churches is really with Emmanuel Church. I've not had that direct input with other religious organizations to see if they share some of the same concerns. As I understand the Emmanuel Church situation, it really boils down to the impervious surface limits related with development on that site. And they've looked at a number of different options with the city staff to date, including short platting and variances. I suspect any solution that we can come up with will require a code amendment specific to religious institutions. As the council no doubt knows, there are specific regulations both under the state of Washington laws, if you will, and the federal laws related to religious institutions and their regulation. And those are handled often a little differently than how we would speak about private development, residential development. So for that reason, I think it is most best treated through a separate code amendment. In terms of your second question, timing, that's really a council direction, really, I would look for. That is something we could take up now. It would take away from some of our planning commission meetings to talk about the subject at hand tonight, the residential development standards, because as a code amendment, it has its own public process. We need to do that public outreach too, and I suspect we're going to have a lot on our plate with the planning commission. Having said that, we could start it now, or we could start it once we're done with the residential development standards. My impression is that the recommendation from the planning commission is that we act on it quickly, given how long this conversation has been going on.
So the first one is actually clarification for you, Mrs. Mayor. Were you saying that you wouldn't want to go forward tonight without the assurance or the structure of additional public input, or were you saying go forward but get that assurance that it was going to be included?
I think at this point, given that the Planning Commission does not actually meet, if I understand correctly, till September 7th, that would leave a month of tremendous opportunity for the city to reach out to the community via multiple vehicles and ensure that they know that we're kicking off this process and get their input and their feedback on the proposed scope of work. It's always great to start with the straw man. It's a lot easier to go from there. And then final confirmation of the scope comes on the basis of what that engagement is and discussion with the Planning Commission. I don't think we necessarily lose any time because there's enough groundwork to be done on September 7th, I'm sure. So I don't want to stop the process, but I certainly don't want to accept the scope as is here tonight.
Got it. Appreciate that. And so my only two comments are just to maybe bookend what some of you have said. I think Jeff said it, that there's a sense of urgency that I think we've got to have. Piling on something that Dan said regarding the name, I think it's also might be good to revisit in the micro planning session the funding of DSG. And I'm not sure that all the citizens know that DSG is a self-funded entity. They're funded by the permitting and development fees, which is not legal, I don't believe, for any other public entity. The police department can't run themselves on traffic citation fees, thank goodness. or my family would pay for a lot of the police force. So I would love us to revisit that and talk about bringing that back into the general fund. The last comment really truly is the bookend, so we can move on, which is probably to Scott and to Pam. We have to get this right. We have to get this one right. This is huge. Everyone on the island is all over this and is super sensitive to it, and the process needs to be perfect, the outcome has to be perfect, people have to be in agreement on what's going on, and I just can't emphasize that enough. The end.
Dan?
I would move to approve the proposed approach, scope of work, and public engagement plan for the single-family residential development standards code amendment, plus, number 1, obtain further public input to determine if other issues need to be addressed, and 2, include additional issues noted by the council. And what I'm referring specifically to, at least, are the 5 that I mentioned, and I'm not sure if anyone else has specific issues they already want to add.
Okay. I'm going to ask for clarification. So we're asking the plus portion of your statement. So the first one is to obtain further public input. So would the public then be providing input based on the suggested additions that have come up tonight here at the dais and/or anywhere else, or?
Well, right now, by my count, if you add the 5 I added, we have 17 issues that are before, that the Planning Commission has on their plate. And the whole purpose of the public input at this point is to see whether there should be 20 issues or 25 issues or whatever it is. But to get the list of issues to a finite amount, so then Evan and his group can say, okay, these are the issues that we're dealing with, and plan that out for the rest of the fall. So what I think you were alluding to, and I think you got strong support from everyone, is between now and September 7th, reach out to the people who, at least to the people who were involved in December on both sides, give them the list of the issues and say, are there any additional issues that you want to add to this that you want us to think about? And that's what I would like to see them do. And then they'll come back to the Planning Commission on September 7th and say, this is our list of issues, and we're off and running.
And the Planning Commission would then potentially prioritize that list or take it in its entirety?
Well, they're going to have how Evan wants to organize it with them, in what order. And I mean, some of them go together, obviously. Some are, if you decide one, it impacts another, and so Evan's going to have to group them in a way which makes them sense.
So, but assuming that there's additional items that are added, would those come back to the council?
I think my suggestion personally would they not come back to the council unless Evan and Scott determine that this thing has gotten out of control and they want to rein it in before this turns into something that's going to take a year to get done.
I'm sorry, Evan, I think, has probably some valuable content here.
I feel so much pressure. Deputy Mayor and Council, if I could suggest, I think this is something we could certainly accomplish through a report back to City Council in September, just on the final work scope, and then if you want to dig into any of the added items, if there are any added items, we could accommodate that. But I believe I understand the Councilmember Grass's comments at this point.
Okay, Pam?
I just wanted to make sure we captured all of the items, so can I just read them back, the extra 5, plus I think you added parking?
I just said that I know that there's people in my neighborhood. I think,
Okay.
See, this is where the process, to my mind, becomes very important, because I want people to know that it's going on. If those same people feel that it's of sufficient importance that they want to formally register it, they should have that opportunity.
Well, the 5 that I wrote down from Councilmember Grouse are the notice of the building permit and an appeal of the building permit, I think is 1. Enforcement was 2, fences was 3, time limits on permits was 4, and short plats was 5. Did I get that right?
Now, let me make sure I understand. So on the time limit on permits, is that to initiate the development or is that to finish the development?
The issue that's been raised by some people tonight was the fact that the Proctor Landing has gone 4 years, and what they've done is every year they go in and renew the building permit, and which our code presently allows them to do. So what was supposed to be an 18-month project has more than doubled in time. And so the question becomes whether our code should say, at the end of 2 years or something, your permit ends, and if you haven't got a CO at that point, then you got to start all over again. Or Scott and Evan can make suggestions, but something that really puts some teeth into, that barring force majeure, you can't get an extension beyond 2 years or something. I don't know the answer, but the issue's been raised, and I think it's a fair one, that having that many years of your life taken away from you by what's going on next door is something that is of concern.
I'd like to second Dan's motion so we could, discuss and vote.
Okay, well, I was going to throw the question back to you, because what I also heard coming from you was allusions to the fact that there was not within scope on the town center a vision statement. And the vision statement was debate, discussion came midpoint, or, well, it didn't come at the beginning, let's just put it that way.
I feel confident that Scott and Allison, and particularly Evan, have got it, and they've got a big thing on their plate that has to be scoped out. I'm just going to add in my comments, budget, if you think you're going to be spending money in various places, to make sure that comes on the table. But getting this process started with the 17 to 22 items is really, really important. So I'm a fan.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. Anybody want to second it?
Second.
Can you guys restate the motion, please?
The motion reads, as it says on the agenda bill, then plus, 1, obtain further public input, determine if other issues need to be addressed, and 2, include additional issues as noted by the council.
Okay, so motion's been first and seconded. Is there discussion? Have we already beaten it to death?
Load it up.
All right, well, in that case, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay.
We take a break for the next one?
Does council want to take a break, or do we want to keep okay.
We've only got one more item.
There's only one more item. Okay, so the next item of regular business is AB 5207, zoning text amendment modifying MICC Title 19 pertaining to procedures for amending the comprehensive plan. First reading. A highly, immediately intuitive title to this item.
I was getting the right papers. And I also wanted to recognize, I didn't introduce them, Tiffin Goodman and Jenny Meacham from the Planning Commission were here this evening, too.
And Lucia.
Oh, and Lucia. Oh, I didn't see you back there. Hi. Okay. So this item before you tonight is a code text amendment that would actually create a more well-defined, transparent, and clear process for how the city amends our comprehensive plan and how private applicants can amend the comprehensive plan. This was one of the items required by the Washington City's Insurance Authority, WCIA, our insurance carrier, when they did their land use audit of the city a couple of years ago. It's one of the items on the list. This has been on our work program for at least since the beginning of the year. We're finally at a point where it's to council. So generally, comprehensive plan amendments can be requested by anyone. We have to review the comprehensive plan for continued compliance with the Growth Management Act, Vision 2040, countywide planning policies, etc., and other state laws at least every 8 years. You just completed that review back in June, so that's done for another, well, now 7 years because we're a year late. And we can consider comprehensive plan amendments no more than once per year, with a few exceptions that are defined by state law. Our current process for amending the comprehensive plan is outlined very generally within the comprehensive plan itself. That's one problem. It should be in our development regulations. But the current process is prior to June of every year, we issue a notice to the public saying, if you have any ideas for amending the comprehensive plan, come talk to us, or you can file your own amendment request. By June, now the comp plan says by June. It doesn't say by June 1st or by June 30th or by June 10th. It just says by June. The amendment requests have to be submitted to the Planning Commission. And then the only other thing it talks about is that the City Council has to act on amendment requests by the end of the year. So you can see there's not a lot of detail there. There is a lot of detail within the code already about how we issue a public hearing notice and who that gets mailed to, and that sort of more ministerial things, but nothing really about how we look at these amendments. State law implies, if not requires, a docketing process. So what's proposed is to create a preliminary docket and a final docket. The preliminary docket is simply, think of it as the work program. So you get a whole list of potential comprehensive plan amendments that the council can propose, the planning commission as a group can propose, staff can propose, or private residents can propose. We put all those on a list, and we bring that to the planning commission. So the way we go about that is by September 1st, we would give notice to the public of this docketing process, and the deadline for submitting proposed amendments would be October 1st. So by October 1st, we have this list. Could be one item, could be 11 items. The Planning Commission then takes a look at the list using these criteria over here on the right, and then recommends the preliminary docket to the City Council. So Planning Commission is basically recommending the comprehensive plan work program to the Council. Which items should stay on the list, which items should be taken off. By the end of the year, the City Council approves the final docket, and you're essentially approving the work plan. This is really great timing with the budget, because if there's a large comprehensive plan amendment or one that requires significant resources, in the fall is usually, or at least every other year, you're adopting the budget for the following calendar year, or the following 2 years, and in the off-budget year, you're doing budget amendments in the fall. So what I've found working in other cities is that this is great timing because we could come to you and say, well, so there's a citizen who wants to amend the comprehensive plan to do something, but we're going to have to hire consultants to help with that because we don't have the expertise to review that on staff. You can make that decision as part of your budgeting process in a more holistic way and not sort of a one-off that you might talk about in April of funding $50,000 for a consultant. The final docket is the one that then we actually dive into the merits of each individual amendment request. So that's the work program. That's the docket, that's the list that we would do the SEPA environmental review on. The Planning Commission would review that final docket, hold a public hearing or public hearings, make a recommendation to Council. State law requires that all plan amendments must be considered concurrently, at least by the City Council, prior to your final action. So they can be taking separate paths all the way through the process, but at the end of the day, it all ends up with you as one item. And you take action by the end of the calendar year. So that's the two-step process, the preliminary docket and the final docket. Some miscellaneous things also included in the proposed ordinance. It's probably somewhat unlikely here on Mercer Island, but it could happen, where there's a comprehensive plan map amendment, like the land use map amendment, that also requires a rezone, or maybe you think about the other way. Somebody wants a rezone that also requires a comprehensive plan map amendment is usually how it turns out. Those need to be considered together. There's often a lot of confusion in city codes as to what comes first. So we just have a short section to say that those can be considered together. They really go hand in hand. Another one that I've seen in other cities that has been helpful is if somebody applies for a comprehensive plan land use map amendment, the city can actually expand the scope of that. So if somebody says, well, I want to change my property to commercial office, the city can look at it and say, you know, that may make sense, but it may also make sense to do the 3 properties next door to it, rather than just having one property commercial office. So we have that ability to expand the scope of that amendment, and obviously still have public notice and public hearings on it, but we could expand the scope of an amendment. Sue Stewart talked about filing fees. This isn't part of the current proposal before you, but since we talked about it this morning, I thought I would just at least raise the issue for you, and we would come back with this type of an amendment. Right now, the current filing fees for a privately submitted amendment is $4,263 for the amendment itself, plus a varying rate for the SEPA environmental review, depending on whether it's single-family or non-single-family. What I'm going to propose in the future is that we actually take that filing fee and we split it up. So it doesn't seem fair to charge somebody over $4,000 just to see if their idea stays onto the final docket. And what other cities have done is they said, okay, we're going to take a percentage of that fee and charge that up front. It's usually a fairly small percentage. And then if council puts that proposal on the final docket, that's when the person would pay the remainder of the fee. So it's kind of like when you get a building permit, you pay for the plan review up front, and then you pay your building permit fee, and I'm generalizing, at the end when you get your permit issued. So the proposed schedule is tonight's first reading of the proposed ordinance. What we'd like to do is get this process started, and we can still do this even under the current provisions. So what we would do is if you're generally acceptable with this procedure this evening after first reading, we would start to work on a notice that would go out to the public to say, hey, get your amendment requests in by October 1st. In any event, whether you adopt this process or not, they would be considered next year. And then September 6th is your second reading, and then if you adopt it on second reading, it would take effect, I believe, September 16th, which is before the October 1st deadline for submittal. So what we'd like to do is get this process moving. This would also be helpful potentially for your single-family residential development standards work. I don't foresee any comprehensive plan amendment changes necessary for any of the work that you just talked about. But if there was something necessary, you would need to get it on a docket, get it on a list to be handled next year. And if you adopt this process on September 6th, I think we'd have enough to go on to at least put a placeholder on the docket by the October 1st deadline. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any council, any questions for Scott? Dan?
So, I'm sorry, so on the residential thing, Scott, so and I tend to agree with you, looking at the comp plan, there probably aren't any changes that are required, but say there was.
Yeah.
So it gets on the docket in November, and when would be the earliest then the comp plan to be changed to deal with a single-family zoning code?
It would be early next year. You've already adopted the comp plan for 2016.
Right.
So whether this passes or not, your next opportunity is 2017. If this passes, you'll have your docketing done by the end of the year, and you could adopt something as quickly as possible in early 2017. If this didn't pass, you would have to wait till the latter half of 2017 under our current provisions.
So is there anything that, should we not consider maybe putting something in here which would allow the council to amend the docket, in this case, say in 2017, and it doesn't have to be single family. What I'm concerned about is we get to February 2017 and, Jeff Sanderson gets up there and says, we really got to do this, and gets the council to agree to it, and you say, but, to do that, we've got to take a change in the comp plan, and you turn around and say, well, we'll get it on the docket at the end of 2017, and we'll see you in 2018. And Jeff and 6 other council members are extremely frustrated at that point. Would it be illegal for us to put something in there which says that maybe by a supermajority vote of the council, we can add something to the docket even after January 1st?
Looking at the city attorney, I don't think it would be illegal to do that. But what would happen is we may have already started on the SEPA review or done the SEPA review, had the public hearings.
I don't want to be in a situation there where some future council or this council wants to do something and gets told, cool your heels for a year. So I'd like to at least have the opportunity to do something that if there's a real will to make a change, then we're able to do that.
I understand your question and your concern, and I'll need to research that and get back to you.
Any additional questions? Benson?
Actually, I just looked at this, is on the 6th, whereas there was something regarding that this I got it right. This proposed zoning code was sent to the Department of Commerce for review. Do they need to approve this, or?
No.
Okay, so it's just, okay.
That's something under Growth Management Act. We have to send all comprehensive plan amendments and development regulation amendments
We have no right to make
Commerce for any comments they might have.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I actually have a question, and it relates back to the discussion of fees, because in some way, in a perverse way, one could look at this, that we're charging the community to bring a really good idea forward. And that, to me, feels awkward. So somebody's got a great idea, yet they don't want to be on the hook for all or a portion of X thousands of dollars. That's an uncomfortable place for me. Do we have to charge these fees? Do we have to charge any fees? And are they equivalent to like-sized and minded municipalities?
I don't have an answer to your last question, but we can certainly do the research. No, you don't have to charge any fees. What I have found is in communities where no fees are charged, you tend to get, I'm just going to say, a lot of ideas. I can't really
These serve as a filter?
Yeah, these serve as somewhat of a filter. Now I will say, one approach some people might take is talking to their favorite city council member and saying, hey, I've got a great idea. I would like you to raise at a council meeting and get the council to add it to the docket. Then
the council doesn't get charged the fee.
Right.
That'd be a good idea.
You can take all my wages for the next year.
Charged by the motion.
Or by the word, that would be better.
By the word, I think that'd be good.
Because again, to my point, I would be uncomfortable if there's people out there who have great ideas and yet they're put off by the fact that a great idea is going to cost them a significant amount of money.
Well, and that's the balancing act. I mean, you could try not having a fee for a year or two and see what happens, but then on the other hand, what you could do, and I know some cities have done this, is you could say there is no fee for the initial docket proposal, and then if it gets on the docket, if it's an amendment that benefits a private property, so somebody wants to rezone their property from residential to commercial office, that's probably more of a private benefit than an overall community benefit. At that point, a fee might be appropriate. Whereas if somebody wants to change the designation of Kite Hill to Park, it's a city-owned piece of property, some community benefit, there's no private benefit to that, and I could see where charging a fee for that might not be what you would want to do.
Okay, well, I think it'd be comfortable if you could find out what some of the options are.
Okay.
Okay, I think I'm looking for motion then. I'll jump to it with lots of enthusiasm.
Well, I move to set ordinance number 16C-13 for second reading and adoption at the September 6, 2016 City Council meeting.
Okay, so it's been first and seconded. Any discussion?
Well, just so I'm saying, Carrie, you understand that motion to still come back to us on the question I raised?
Yes, I'll come back to you, and I'm doing some quick research now, and I am seeing some exceptions to an annual docketing amendment process, but I'll want to talk to Scott and craft something for further consideration in that second reading.
Thank you.
Okay, it's been first and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries.
Okay, thank you.
We are done with regular business. At 9:10. Well done. Okay, so the next set of business is actually other business. The first one would be council member absences. Does anybody want to make a motion to excuse Mayor Bassett?
He's getting...
He's been in France.
This has been getting too regular. So it's 2 meetings and...
I move that we excuse Mayor Bassett.
All in favor? Well, somebody can... Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Bruce has been excused. Okay, the next part of the other business is the planning schedule, so I'm going to hand it over to Pam.
Well, based on your action earlier today at our request about the interlocal with Mercer Island School District, that will come back, we hope, on the 6th now. And then you should have received from our city clerk earlier in the day some dates for the micro planning retreat. So if you could get back to her on that, it's either on, there's one of a couple of Fridays, one on September 30th, another one on October 7th, a couple of times. And then failing a Friday, she's proposing Saturday, October 1st in the morning.
So is this going to be is it a half-day retreat, or what is it?
It's scheduled for, it appears to be 3 hours. Yeah, 3 hours.
Micro. We have planning, mini, now micro.
Micro. We're going to get to nano before Christmas.
Well, council meetings are longer than...
Yeah, so it's going to be shorter than a council meeting.
Well said. Let's make all of those micro planning sessions. Okay. Anything else? I would call out the fact that the next city council meeting is not until Tuesday, September 6th, as we've canceled the August 15th meeting, and it actually starts at 5:30 with an executive session.
So I have two requests. One, Pam, in response to the email you sent me, apparently there's a meeting involving Bruce and Ralph in mid-August to talk about the school district's involvement with road projects, and I'd like hopefully that can be reported back to us at the September meeting on the results of those discussions.
Yes, they're meeting on August 17th, and the topics are the 42nd Street project, which we have already some good news on. Kristen and I met with Gary Polino and also with some of our other staff. And at the time, they offered to do a more reduced project, but pay for it themselves. So that is being engineered with our folks and theirs, and they're going to come back before the 17th of August with a design that both is safe as well as the school district will pay for it. It'll be their project. The other items...
It's amazing what you get if you ask.
The other items on the agenda are, I guess, a perennial discussion of ball fields, both scheduling and investment, and then discussions of future levies and how the deficit for YFS will be rectified.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned to Pam, I would love to know from a legal standpoint whether the school district can include counselors in the M&O levy. Next M&O levy is 2018, and it would seem that might be if the rest of the council is interested and the school board was willing to figure out a way to address that problem by just going to the voters as part of the M&O levy. Just an idea, but I'd love to at least start that discussion in some way.
I would also point out that you're having a joint board
Right, but those are so
meeting.
scripted that it's like every word that's said at that is already planned in advance. No, I didn't say that, did I? Yeah, I did.
Take this out.
Fullness of time. Yeah. The other question I had about the planning schedule, the same question I asked last time, where are we on MICA in terms of getting the lease back to us? When do we get that on the calendar?
They met with me today and with Scott and with Carrie, and I think that's being worked out. I think that most of the discussion was between, I believe it was their attorney, Carrie, was that their attorney?
Yes, their attorney was present, Dale Matsunaga.
And Carrie's. And so they're working out a schedule, but it appears that they're in a hurry, and we're trying to help them keep to their schedule as much as we can.
So hopefully we'll know by September when we're going to be able to get it on the planning calendar?
We'll know more soon. Scott received some follow-up materials as part of the ongoing SEPA review, and so now he's undertaking a determination of completeness to determine if we have all the necessary application materials for the SEPA review to move forward, and then there's process after that. We'll know more once the determination of completeness, if that is in fact made, then things will follow a pretty standard sequence after that. So we talked about sequencing, we talked about next steps, and Micah's attorney and I have definitely agreed on some various processes that make sense from a sequencing perspective. I still can't give you that exact timing, again, because supplemental material was received today, but it is moving forward, and absolutely the council will get updates as more information becomes known, but that's where we're at right now.
Great, thanks, Gary.
Anything else on the planning schedule? Okay. Good. We have no board appointments this evening, and we'll move to council member reports. Start with Benson.
I was on vacation, so I have none.
Okay.
Tell us what you did on vacation.
Wendy?
I just want to take a minute to call out Tamby Cork. She's organized the summer volunteer program and the Volunteer Outreach in Communities Everywhere program. That's Voice and SVP, and it's an awesome program that this city does where middle schoolers and young high schoolers can get out there and do volunteer service for nonprofit organizations on the east side in Seattle. And my kids have participated. My son is doing it this summer, and Tammy does a phenomenal job, and we are having a huge impact. And most importantly, our kids are getting a view of life on Mercer Island and in the region about all the needs and all the ways they can make a difference. So huge kudos to Tamby Cork. She does a phenomenal job, and she's one of our heroes in the back office. I'm not talking about libraries.
Jeff?
You just did. Yeah, but we had the speech, the library reopened. That was a great event. Summer concert series, the Arts Council has tons of stuff going on. I gave the intro speech to the last one, and there were tons of people there. It's really exciting. If you can get to a concert this summer, it's a wonderful community experience, and so that's great. And we had Open Space Conservancy Trust, but you're seeing a lot. I mean, we had an incident with a dog in the park, and so I think we're going to have to keep watching what goes on in the in the leash versus off leash area as we move forward.
Dan? Okay, I have nothing other than I would, two things. I give the final reminder that tomorrow night's National Night Out, both in specific neighborhoods, but then also at the town center. And then just a quick update for the community on the city manager recruitment process. The application period just closed on July 31st yesterday, and we have received a total of 40 applications, which I think is tremendous. So the recruitment committee, which is Jeff, myself, Bruce, and key staff, will be meeting on Wednesday to take a first look at those candidates. Be coming back to you in September, and then hopefully we will actually be running the public candidate interview process on the 22nd, reception on the 22nd of September, followed by in-depth interviews on the 23rd. So it's moving forward. All right, so with that, it is 9:19. Well done, everybody. We are adjourned.